Well, Houston Regionals is here, and people are lining up and signing up for the Swiss rounds that are going to be happening here any time now. But with that, what is the distribution of these decks? Are we going to be seeing like 50, 60% Kai'Sa, or is the meta going to be maybe a little bit wider? Well, let's go ahead and dive in to what that might look like, as well as the deck lists. All of that and more starting right now. This is going to be one of the hardest parts about that. This is the first regionals. I mean, the game's been out for a little over a month now, and it is time to compete. And that can be a little bit difficult because with a game that is so brand new, it's like, well, what are we going to do? And a lot of people were definitely basing a lot of their experiences or on what decks to build based off of what we necessarily saw in China, with the exception, at least, of what Master Yi is able to do, mainly due to the fact of how difficult it was to get any proving grounds here in America and overseas alike. Now, that can be a little bit difficult because when you do see a meta that is so wide open, it's like, well, are we going to go ahead and just see 50% of the field being Kai'Sa? And that can be a little bit scary because that's not anything that anyone in particular wants. Now, with that, we have over 1,200 people that are going to be competing. We'll get the final numbers on that tomorrow as well. But this is going to be interesting because we have so many people that are coming together. They have built their decks and whatnot, but likewise, I don't think that we are going to be seeing as wide of a distribution of Kai'Sa that we have seen in the past. I think this is going to be more of a reflection on what we have seen in like Vegas and also in Atlanta, where yes, Kai'Sa was still probably between 30 and 40% of the field. I'm leaning closer towards probably the 40%, which is still a lot, don't get me wrong there. But at the same time, I think the other decks that are starting to sneak into this meta are really starting to make a presence. Not only that, we have seen a huge uptick in selling on Sett, for example, especially. Being able to, I mean, we saw the showstoppers alone go from $60 to $100 overnight almost, just with people who are trying to pick up those cards. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, that is with a very limited supply right now that is driving up those prices so much on top of that. But the demand remains the same, that a lot of people are potentially making the switch, whether, they don't necessarily like how maybe Kai'Sa plays, or even more so that, Sett might just be a little bit more powerful of a deck. He has the explosive ability of being able to just be very difficult to kill, but not only that, able to get very high might incredibly easily, while also being able to buff and save everything else. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, but I really do think that Sett and Annie especially are going to be making the climb. Now, there is one other thing I want to bring up before we go into the deck lists and things of that nature, and that's going to be that Master Yi hasn't necessarily made really all that many top 8 appearances. We have seen some in, being able to get like second every so often, or top 8 once in a blue moon with these bigger tournaments, but he hasn't necessarily made his stance yet. And that can be something really interesting. Is Master Yi going to be able to make it into a top 16, top 32? The answer is definitely yes. But at the same time, is he then going to be able to break into the top 8? When we saw Vegas, for example, Master Yi was able to go ahead and get 9th. So just on the cusp. Now, mind you, that was an Aurora Yi deck. And then 13th place, if I remember correctly, on the other Yi deck that was just the normal ramp Yi. Or eggplant Yi, as some people call it, whatever. Anyway, with that, though, it's going to be interesting because Master Yi has kind of fallen to the wayside, and I think a lot more people are even switching over to Annie. She is the aggro deck that people are flocking to. And the cool part about Riftbound is that it is almost such a different aggro than what you have in other perceived card games, where instead of just going wide and then just being able to hit hard or whatever it might be, or just playing out a bunch of accelerated units or whatnot, it's like Annie is able to just go ahead and get a lot of points really quickly with units and things of that nature, and we'll break into that later. But I gotta say, I am really shocked with what Annie has been able to do in this meta and the sudden climb, where she is now one of the top decks, if not probably the second most played deck, next to at least Master Yi. It's a very close competition there as well, but I'm curious to see what Annie is going to be able to do this weekend. Now, likewise, it's going to be really interesting to see because we have some great pricing. Now, of course, you're going to get a Misfortune promo as well, just for signing up in this case. But at the same time, we got some good prizes going for first place, second, third, fourth, and even a custom champion mat. One of a kind right there. Whew, wouldn't want to necessarily play on that, scratch that up or whatever, you know. And also a custom foiled Misfortune card, man, and it looks good. For those of you who might not have seen the China regionals or whatnot, that promo card just looks so good. Not only that, but also in this regionals, there is going to also be the medal cards that you can potentially win, where you are, if you play with your chosen champion and you do the best out of everyone there, you get a basically one of foil card in that case. And I mean, that is going to be sought after way more than the signed cards at that point. And it's going to be really interesting because we don't necessarily have any of the pictures on that just yet. So as those start flooding the internet, that's something that we're definitely going to be looking at. But with that as well, Kai'Sa is going to be the number one deck that we are going to be seeing here. Now, is it going to be on the lower end where, yeah, she is going to be about, 30% of the field, 20% of the field? Maybe. But at the same time, I'm thinking it's going to be closer to 30%. That's going to be something really interesting because she has a consistency, the card draw, the power, the ability to just go ahead and remove things and then accelerate things out and take things over. Then you have big finishing spells like Time Warp and a Caffeine Rain, which can then devastate your board state with 12 damage or giving you another turn, and your opponent is necessarily not able to do anything about that. Now, of course, there is some Mystic Reversals and things, don't get me wrong, but still, in the broad scheme of things, there isn't necessarily a whole lot that you can do once Kai'Sa really gets going. And I mean, that consistency and that power that she is able to have is something that really has devastated this meta. But still, the biggest thing is as well, is that a lot of people haven't necessarily, a lot of people have figured out and built their decks around beating Kai'Sa. We've seen this with Sett and Annie and things of that nature as well, where they also still have really good matchups into Kai'Sa to where that they can really punish her, especially if she happens to have that slower start or just miss some removal. I mean, Sett alone, if Kai'Sa doesn't necessarily find a lot of that removal, cool. I'm going to just stampede over you. And on top of that, even if you do find the removal, well, if you Falling Star my Sett, cool. Unless you meet certain parameters to be able to kill him properly, he's just going to go back to base and be able to swing in for potentially 8 to 12 on the next turn. And that kind of speed is just something that Kai'Sa necessarily can't put up with. And so there's a couple of things that they need to have go right for them. And it can be a very technical deck. A lot of people just sometimes think that Kai'Sa is just a sit down and play, and it's going to do its own thing. But really, you have to understand your deck matchups a lot as well. And I think that's where Kai'Sa has started to fall a little bit short in this meta, where a lot of competitors are facing off and fighting opponents anticipating the mirror match, where they might not have played as many test games as as they have Kai'Sa into Sett and into Annie, and yeah, they probably play tested more into Master Yi and whatnot, and they almost felt like probably that the Sett and the Annie matchup might have been a guaranteed win. And I mean, I really got to say that Atlanta and on top of that, Vegas was probably a pretty big wake-up call for a lot of these competitors. That gave them a week probably to at least start playtesting all of these different deck lists, memorizing what they do and don't do, and all the cards that they have in each deck and whatnot. But even still, I mean, 1 week is not a lot of time. So it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of impact that experience has. I mean, this again is open invite. If you were able to go ahead and get a ticket, you can go ahead and compete. And all kinds of level of competitors are going to be there competing. Now, with that being said, there are a bunch of different ways that Kaisa can really be formulated. We're seeing ones where, I mean, it is the extreme here, where you are seeing 2 Acathian Rains, 2 Time Warps, even a Time Warp in the backfield, and things of that nature. Now, the caveat with that is if you are running the Time Warp, you are running retreats. Not necessarily to save units that you want to save, but really just to be able to channel a rune to get you closer to either getting to a Acathian Rain or to especially the Time Warp. That's really the big reason why you are going to be running the 3 retreats, is if you are running the Time Warp right here. Really good card, able to do a lot. Now, there is a lot of debate on what people want to do with this style of deck. Do I want to go more of 2 Time Warps and no Acathian Rain in the main deck? Do I want to go with just 2 Acathian Rain? Do I do 1 and 1? Do I do 2 and 1? There's a lot of big debates on that kind of allocation, but otherwise the deck stays generally the same. And so it's going to be interesting to see what that is able to do in this current meta, because there's a lot of theory crafting around all of this. And so I'm curious to see what is going to be happening here and what kind of impact this deck is going to make. Will Kaisa get their big win finally, or will Sett, Annie, or even Master Yi be able to take the throne this time? We've already seen that Sett is able to do so. Annie very well could have in Vegas. Annie was the #1 seed going into the top 4 when they decided to go ahead and split the player pool, the cash money. So we don't know who necessarily would have won Vegas at that point. But even still, Annie was in first place and very well could have won it all. So a lot of possibilities there and something very interesting to consider. So with Master Yi, of course, this is going to be a big difference maker here. He is a wall that is just put up where you can go ahead and sit back and just play reactionary cards to be able to boost the might of your units while also being able to still maintain decent card draw. He is so difficult sometimes to get around, and especially when you also play the champion Master Yi, you can go right in and take back a battlefield and then make it very difficult for you to be able to hold at that point, or for your opponents to be able to attack back in and take it over. The +2 as the legend ability is incredible and just makes it so difficult for anyone to really be able to combat against this. I'm still really interested to see if he's going to be able to continue to make a break in this meta. I do feel like, though, a lot of people haven't been playing Master Yi, mainly due to the fact that 1, Proving Grounds, yes, is very difficult to come by, but also 3 Dead Bloom Predators, I mean, at $100 a piece, that's a lot to ask, let's be real. And so Master Yi has definitely taken a step back in at least representation, where in China we saw that it was literally like, 30% Kaisa, 30% Master Yi, and then like 20% Viktor, and then everything else in the field. And so that distribution in and of itself is starkly different from what we are seeing. Now, of course, if Wave 2 is able to be successful here, we very well could be seeing Master Yi really flood into this market, especially as the Dead Bloom Predators really can start to make their presence known as the prices hopefully come down. Time will tell, we will see. But even still, Master Yi is definitely one of the best decks out in this current format. Now, the biggest thing is there's a couple of different versions. There was like a 9th place version like we talked about that did the Aurora build. And in this case, this is more of the traditional build of what you are going to be seeing, where you very well could be seeing a Find Your Center to be able to draw a card and channel a rune. Not only that, if your opponent has more than 5 points, then you can go ahead and pay 1 for that. Also, Kiana, incredibly difficult for Kaisa players to be able to take down. I mean, whether it's in Sett or it's in Master Yi, both have very scary things that you have to be mindful of, because if with her deflect, it can be so difficult to even go ahead and Falling Star, or you would have to Stupefy and Falling Star, or even just go ahead and hope that you have a Draven and potentially a Cleave as well with that. So there's a lot of things that can make this deck so difficult to go ahead and to defeat in this case. Now, the difficult part is that you really need that 2-drop early game, and you almost need to go first a little bit more. If you end up going second, it can be a little bit more difficult for you to be able to take battlefields and hold things. Not only that, though, when you do finally get out to a battlefield and they're sitting pretty and they think that they're there, well, you go ahead and you take one, then you can charm them over the enemy's unit over to your battlefield. You get the bonus of Master Yi's ability, and then you're able to just go ahead and maintain board state control for the rest of the game. It can be very difficult then to go ahead and take down Yi. At the same time, he's pretty much a one-trick pony. He's a great one for beginners, in my opinion. Yes, there are some tricks and things that you have to learn, some lines that you have to understand, but generally, he is the one thing of, I get to the battlefield, I need to hold. If I do that, I will win. If I don't, then I just lose. And that's going to be the big thing too. It's like, well, sometimes when you go ahead and you accelerate out your Master Yi, well, you're using all 7 of your runes at that point to do so to get back a battlefield. And then Kaisa just goes ahead and Falling Stars and destroys it. So really interesting to see how that is, because sometimes you do have to sacrifice the point and just hope that your opponent doesn't have the answers in the Falling Star. Not only that, Dead Bloom Predator here is one of the most powerful cards in this game. It's why it's such an expensive deck to have, and also a one of in the sideboard of White Flame Protector, just so you guys can see. That's going to be the biggest thing about this. And I mean, this is something that is pretty scary to see and try to get around in this case, because you have to somehow get over the 10 might, also hoping that your opponent doesn't have any, disciplines or unguards or things of that nature to really make it difficult for you to try to get over this. And that is something in and of itself that can be so difficult to try to deal with. Now, Tasty Fey Folk is incredibly powerful as well, mainly due to the fact that it can come in accelerated, and then when it dies, you are going to channel 2 runes exhausted and draw a card for potentially 8 and a power, which is just unheard of there. So really cool to be able to see the dynamics of this deck. And man, again, if the prices end up coming down, this could be something that we see prevalent in the meta and at your local game stores. Now, next is Annie. Again, like I say, probably one of the most aggro decks out there. You can definitely argue that Darius Hook is a very formidable one as well, but Annie almost seems to do it better, especially just as a consistency issue as well. Yes, Annie isn't necessarily going to have a lot of big units, but she doesn't necessarily need to count on that. You're probably going to have maybe 7, and caveat there, like maybe 10 might total if you go ahead and do the Darius Cleave. But otherwise, 7 with Darius alone is maybe going to be the best that you are going to do, and potentially 5 if you are running Vayne. But that's not what you have to worry about. What you have to worry about instead is what Annie is capable of doing, mainly due to her being able to just go ahead and attack in really fast and play things like Sneaky Deckhand to get 2 points early on, discard a lot of cards, and then once she gets to 6 points, she can vie and ride the wind. Green, of course, can counter this sometimes, where you have defies and things of that nature, but even still, Annie is able to play incredibly consistently, though she is a very difficult deck to pilot. You have to be able to balance the runes, your rune count, your card count, and your board presence all at the same time, while still dealing with the threats that your opponent has and what they are possibly able to then present in the following turns. So Sneaky Deckhand is going to be very helpful on getting points, but you need things like Stack Deck, even Void Seeker to try to go ahead and get the card draw, and even some good removal at that point as well can be a big difference maker. Likewise, this deck can be a little bit expensive, especially with the Kaisas being at $90 right now. But likewise, otherwise than that, it's actually a fairly cheap deck. Usually around $250, including the Kaisas. Darius here at 3 has dropped down to about $9 as well. And again, this is just such a fun deck to play because you have so much maneuverability. You have Fight or Flight, where if your opponent attacks and you're like, nope, they're gone. And you can hide that card or play it from your hand because the Legend ability will allow you to ready 2 runes every single turn. That alone is incredibly powerful. Not only that, you also have Flash, where you are going to be able to grab up to 2 of your units and move them back into base. That can be incredibly powerful as well, because if you lose your units, that can be something that is very difficult to be able to get back, especially when you are limited on card draw. But if you can go ahead and preserve them for another round, well, that's potentially 2 more points that you are going to be able to get, and that alone can be the big difference maker. Now, the biggest thing that you might be struggling with in this case as well is, again, the Kai'Sa removal. You're going to be devastated by things like Falling Star or a Cathian Rain. But if they do something like a Void Seeker or a Hextech Ray or things of that nature, and you have things like Flash or Fight or Flight, and you're able to then move back to base, that's going to be incredibly powerful. Not only that, you have things to really give you a big advantage battlefield-wise, whereas other decks might have 1 or 2 battlefields to really help out. But here it's like Dreaming Tree. Cool, I am going to target my units in that battlefield, and I am going to draw a card once per turn every time I do that. I have Zon Warrens. I don't need this card right now. I am going to get rid of it and then be able to draw a card that I potentially can utilize a lot better. Not only that, then Arena's Greatest, where, hey, I'm going first. Okay, cool. I'm going to go fast, and on top of that, I am starting with 1 additional point. You get 2 also, but the game is going to be going that much quicker. Can you keep up? Not only that, but the Annie Champion is an incredibly powerful card where you are able to go ahead and get back a spell from your discard and put it back into your hand. Now, of course, you're only running 1 Annie, but still, if you're able to do something and get back your Fight or Flight if you need to find it, or even like a Falling Star to be able to clear up your opponent's board state, that can make a big difference as well and can be something that you can better utilize. Not only that, if you need to also dig, you can go ahead and play Annie, play a stack deck, try to find that final piece that you might need, and then be able to win the game. Annie is just one of the most fun decks to be able to play. Absolutely love what she's able to bring. And man, I think we are going to continue to see her grow in popularity for the foreseeable future. It's going to be curious to see what happens in Set 2, but I really think that Annie can still have a very great presence in the meta in this game for the foreseeable future, even into Set 2. Now, speaking of sets, we got Sett. And the big thing about this is that he just has probably one of the, if not the most powerful legend ability in this game. The fact that you can go ahead and spend a buff and put a rune into the bottom of your deck, your rune deck at least, and then be able to save a unit is incredibly powerful. So, especially with the Sett Champion, where you are able to then go ahead and as you conquer, you can buff him again. So not only can you go up to 8, potentially 12, once you conquer that battlefield, he gets buffed again, and you can immediately send him back to base if someone ends up taking it over. And then again, you can just go right back in and potentially have 8 to 12 might again to be able to take down your opponent. Again, though, too, this is a great matchup into the Master Yi as well as Kai'Sa, because a lot of the removal just doesn't necessarily have the impact. Likewise, though, one of the hardest things that can happen to Sett is that you are going to be finding yourself sometimes struggling to maybe buff units here. So you got to be a little bit careful about how you go about doing that. But even still, this is incredibly fun to be able to see. Again, though, the Divine Judgment right here, it's a one of. This is kind of the debate here on how many people want to actually run. It can be a little bit of a deciding factor there. Some people run 0, most people run 1. It's up to the beholder there, the deck builder in that case, on what they want to be able to do. Sometimes it feels great, other times it doesn't, because your opponent might not have a lot of cards in hand, and they get to go up to 4 on the following turn anyway, so it doesn't really impact them at that point. You know, time will tell. But the biggest thing is that Sett is just such a scary champion to be able to have and to be able to face. You also have things where you can spend a buff from anywhere on the field to be able to play Call of Glory to then add +3 to a unit at that point, which gives you so much ability to be able to, you know, keep your units alive in a battle. That can be a big difference. Now, I'm going to be really curious to see how all of this is going to continue to unravel, because Sett is someone that can be incredibly consistent, but needs to be able to find those buffs. You have those here in this deck where you have Pit Rookie, Arena Bar, and you even have Karma, for example, to where when you go ahead and look, if you don't add a card to your hand and you just vision it or whatever kind of thing, then you're able to buff a unit. So not only that, and Kithku or Kinku Monk is also really good to be able to add buffs to up to 2 units other than herself there. So again, just a really fast way to be able to move. The scary part about Sett in this case, where it can be a little bit difficult, is that you do not have card draw necessarily. What you see is what you get. So if you get that card at the top of your deck, awesome, that's really good. If not, well, I think really the only card draw that you necessarily have is your battlefield, which is Monastery, or potentially Hidden Blade. And so you need a couple of different dynamics and that explosiveness to be able to get things done. So I'm going to be curious to see what Sett is going to be doing this weekend. I really think that we are going to be seeing a lot of him in top 16. And by a lot of him, probably about 4 or so. At that point, 4 or more, that I think could really be breaking into it. This is going to be incredibly powerful and something to watch out for. Now, the final deck that we are going to be talking about is Teemo. Now, I mainly say Teemo just due to the fact by what Prismaticism was able to go ahead and do in Vegas. Now, of course, there were a couple in Atlanta and also in Vegas that were able to do a lot, but Prismaticism has shown, like, hey, Teemo actually might not have as bad of a matchup as what we initially anticipated into Kai'Sa. Yes, it can be very difficult if you're going into a Kai'Sa and they start with Hextech Ray and things of that nature. That can really suck. But outside of that, Teemo has a really good momentum that he's able to go ahead and run. Not only that, but he has a lot of cards that he is going to be able to draw from and utilize to really devastate the board against your opponent. You got to be so careful about going against this because he can go ahead and hide cards without having to recycle, which in and of itself can add a lot more power to your board state. So absolutely love what Teemo is able to do here because you're going to be guessing, is this card that is face down a fight or flight? Is it actually a tide turner or even just a consult of the past? What could it be? Not only that, though, but the monk is so powerful. And a lot of times you're going to see people move in with like a traveling merchant. And it's like, oh yeah, sure. I'll go ahead and give you that battlefield. I'll be able to take it back. And then all of a sudden traveling merchant comes in with a monk being played into the battlefield. And it's like, okay, that's really difficult. And then on top of that, they play a hidden card, potentially 2 if they're playing Boundle Tree. And then you're just like, oh, shoot, that's really difficult. Then on top of that, if they go in with a Dr. Mundo, even mid to late game where he's at 12, 14 initially, that is just putting you at a standstill that can be so difficult to try to overtake. And it is why he is incredibly fun to be able to play. Now, we haven't necessarily seen as much representation of Teemo. And I think really the biggest issue with that is because so many people got under the assumption that Kai'Sa is such a horrible matchup in general. That doesn't necessarily need to be the case. I don't think it's as bad of a matchup as what you initially might believe that it is. Not only that, but Teemo can be an incredibly cheap deck to build, all things considered. What's expensive here outside of Thousand Tail Watcher? Nothing, really. I mean, maybe the Guerrilla Warfare, but that's at $20. And the Thousand Tail Watcher, you're running 2. Okay, that's pretty dang good right there. And so, all in all, this is a pretty great deck to be able to build budget-wise, and there's a lot that you are able to then do with it. So I'm going to be curious to see if Teemo, with how he's been performing, might have a little bit more representation. Now, I still think he's going to be on the lower end, but not nearly as low as like what Lee Sin might be or Ari or things of that nature, which is why I put him here at 5th compared to the other decks that we're not necessarily going to be talking about because while, yes, they are technically in this meta, they're probably not going to have a really great showing at this regionals. There is always that outlier. There's always that chance, but I'm saying it's probably not going to happen. But still, for a lot of you out there, I would not sleep on Teemo. I think we have a really good chance of being surprised with the power behind this deck. So with that being said, guys, that is going to be it all. Now, what do you think is going to be happening with the regionals this weekend? We are going to be broadcasting all of that here as well to the best of our ability and bringing all of that to you. So a lot to look forward to there. And I mean, I'm really curious. I think if I had to predict, I think Sett is going to take this top prize, first place. I also think Prismaticism, especially with his skill, if I recall correctly, he is also at the Houston Regionals, and I believe he is going to be again in the top 16, if not the top 8. Everything else, we'll wait and see what ends up happening. But thank you guys so much for being here. Been an absolute blast, and until next time, guys, have a good one.